Hello viewers, this video was intended for International Men's Day, but alas, it was not meant to be. It is a little late for a few reasons, mainly my own ineptitude, but also because this was a very hard one for me to make. I'm going to share, and perhaps indeed overshare a little, in the hope it might help open or add to the online discussion on the topics I touch on. Perhaps it will even help someone listening. I would like to begin by saying I am not looking for any pity. I cannot stress this enough. I've had my fair share of it, and I have no appetite for it. If I evoke any feelings of concern, I would ask you save it for those I'll get to mentioning. While I have hinted at my own experiences through various tweets, poems, videos, they've usually been purposefully scant on detail. This video will also skirt over lots of detail, but I'm going to provide some sensitive information in an attempt to provide you some insight. I think this is important enough. Please consider what you would call a broken man, and how far you would go to fix such a man. Indeed, if at all. As a side note, I think it's worth noticing that I, and I suspect you, are far more familiar with the phrase broken man than broken woman. Perhaps this is for similar reasons we recognise ruined woman over ruined man. Perhaps it might be where society at large places the worth of men and women? Anyway, I digress. I think at the very least, at one point in my life, could be accurately described as a broken man. Please allow me to take you back to the heady days of 2008. I had finally broken into the IT job market that I had trained for. Years of tedious jobs and grind had finally paid off. Almost immediately after, there was a company-wide announcement, which took place at the City Guild Hall. The recession had just hit, and all progression and training programs were to cease immediately, along with a ream of other cost-saving measures. As the months rolled on, my career projections went into a steeper nosedive. Further cuts were made, outsourcing and talks of corporate takeover loomed, along with redundancies. My personal means at this time were nothing special. I lived with my fiancée. However, we were up to our eyeballs in debt. Some very foolish choices on my part. These were not comfortable times, but we were happy. But news of questioning my job security worried me. The pressure was starting to build. Now, my recollection of the order of what came next is a little fuzzy. So I must ask you forgive me if I cannot say with absolute certainty when, but I can tell you indeed what. Was it the announcement of the redundancy of my department that came first? Or was it the phone call at work from the missus that my closest college friend had randomly died from a blood clot? Or was it finding out one of my few school friends had committed suicide after being denied access to his son after being accused of abusing his estranged partner? I certainly remember when his father could not bring himself to carry the casket, being blindsided when I unthinkingly stepped into the breach. I still remember the dead weight rocking inside the box, with each step, the weight gently shifting side to side, along with the knowledge that was once the gentle giant I called friend. I think that was the order, and it came in what felt like quick succession. Over this time, my mental well-being deteriorated rapidly. I'd given up on maintaining the finances, housework, myself, and indeed my relationships, especially with my other half, for whom I was making life a living hell, with my increasingly dark moods and tendency to close myself off and indeed turn to drink. Fast forward a bit. I was now living with my parents. The missus had returned to hers after a period of time living with my parents too. It didn't work out too well. I was now signed off from work for months at a time on a varying cocktail of prescription drugs. It was during this time things really started to get dark. I would lose sections of time and find myself in places I didn't remember going to. I would later find out I was still active during those periods. I was also suffering from hyper-realistic dreams in which horrific things would happen and I would be convinced they were real once I woke up. The barriers between dream and reality began to fall away. I went for weeks on end without leaving the house in fear of losing time in public in case of an incident. This would lead to some form of agoraphobia, which took months of cognitive behavioural therapy-based exercises to eventually overcome. Next, I started to find that I felt emotionally numb. It was as if I had forgotten how to feel, or my brain at least refused to recognise it. In short, I was a mess, an absolute shadow of my former self. Depending on what time you caught me, I was either unstable, unfeeling, or unresponsive, and even sometimes threatening. I was making my parents fear for their safety in their own home. I was not far from being put into care. But enough about me. This is all just context. I want to focus now on those who went through this with me, because this is as much their story as it is mine. Spoilers, they are the heroes, and my sickness was the villain. Which by extension I attribute that villainy to myself, but that's another video around guilt. I have to say this is a testament to the benefits of the function of the family unit and strong familial bonds. I count myself extremely, I can't stress this enough, extremely lucky to have had the support network at that point in time in my life. Why? Well, the state system was, and still is, poorly equipped to help me in that situation. And when it decided it could try to help me, the help was very little and a long time coming. There were no local charities or support groups available to help either, so for all intents and purposes, I was under the care of my family unit. I am convinced if it were not for them, I would still be unwell, probably homeless, or even no longer drawing breath. I was not strong enough to see myself through this. Unfortunately, my circle of friends didn't know what to do with me and kept a respectful distance. I cannot remember how open I was to their help if they offered it, but for the most part, they were out of the picture. It was ultimately my family who picked up this broken man and started putting him back together again, at least until I was strong enough to feel I could do it myself. It was a long process. I think it was almost 4 years before I could look at myself in the mirror and recognise who I saw in the reflection. I have to respect the emotional cost I inflicted on my loved ones, especially the missus. She was free to walk away at any point. In fact, I offered her an out on several occasions. This was not what she signed up for, and I felt at the time I was wasting her prime years of life. She flat out refused, without hesitation, every time. Even though I was no longer the man she loved, even though I was a walking litany of problems, she remained. I made her promise that if I was ever abusive or physically aggressive, she was to walk away. She insists it never got like that. To this day, I suspect I owe her more than I know. My family had to essentially deal with a shell of somebody they loved, watching helplessly as I sank deeper into my personal purgatory. Love, patience, loyalty, and determination not to give up on me. Years of this was afforded me. I will never forget. So, the broken man. I asked you to consider this at the beginning. The society I am in overwhelmingly seems unable to process a man in distress. Even my friends didn't know how to handle it. A broken man is destined for the scrap heap, according to society. Another crazy, another homeless, another criminal. It is my belief that my family saw me through this because they did not see me merely as a man, but as son, brother, soulmate. As a society, we are ill-equipped to help men in need, both on a structural support level and a socially emotional level. The empathy is just not there. And so the societal will to change this remains unmoved. Perhaps one of the first steps is to stop thinking about men as broken. That and see value in men beyond function. Things break, people hurt. But for now, this was some of my story of a broken man. I was lucky to have others who were brave enough to write themselves in as heroes. I ask you to consider one more thing. There are so many other so-called broken man stories out there, and so many of them lack heroes. To round this off, I will leave you with a crap poem I wrote around the time I was still recovering. There were days when I saw the sky never brighten. All thoughts were desperate, angry, and frightened. There were days when I was not wearing my skin. I would leave it somewhere, and a monster climbed in. There were days when I could do nothing at all, dead to the world, only heeding the abyss's call. There were days when my actions did not really occur, dreams so vivid rather than an abstract blur. There are days when I feel those days have returned. I am a reformed wax candle, but the wick is still burned. Now go do something heroic. Be seeing you.